Hey kids, this is Ivan. When Alex Hormozi tells his many-sided die story as it relates to success, it works for him for a reason because it's very simple, it's very visceral, and it speaks directly to the idea that success takes persistence. However, there is a bit of a problem. It does have a serious flaw. Now, Alex Hormozi is apparently this, YouTube phenomenon with over 3 million subscribers. I kind of know who he is. I think today I watched the second video of his I've ever watched. But it piqued my interest for whatever reason. I'm listening, and then he starts talking about dice. Dice, you say? Oh ho! I mean, hey, it's me. And so I love dice and dice probabilities. So let me give you the story. I'm going to talk about the dice results first, and then talk about the broader implication. Now, the way the story goes is there are two players, and each of them is rolling a die. And a success is when you roll a green side on the die. The dice only have red and green sides. And each one of the dice starts out with just one green side. Now, one of the dice has 20 sides. Yeah, there it is, D20. The other die has 200 sides. 200? Well, he's not a gamer apparently, or maybe he is. But anyhow, let's keep going. So essentially, the two players don't know who has the 200-sided die and who has a 20-sided die. So they start rolling, and here's one of the catches also. Every time you roll a success, you roll a green, well then another green side appears on your die, so it makes your chances of success much more likely the next time. And so the players keep rolling, and eventually, the way the story goes is one of the players, just rolls a green first, and the other player starts to wonder, maybe I have the die that, I have the bad luck. And as time goes on, a player might have a streak of greens, and one player finally gives up, and they figured, well, it's rigged. I don't have a chance of doing it. I might as well just quit. And it's a pretty clever way of saying, keep trying. Persistence pays off over time. But does it? Do you always end up winning the game if you keep rolling? Well, let's take a look at the numbers. We can think of all the sides on the dice representing the challenges you might have. And so if you have a small die, well, you're probably a cisgender white male in a country like the United States. Maybe you're born in a position of privilege, not just because of who you are, but maybe your family has some money. Maybe you got some help from other people. Maybe you're working in a niche which is highly profitable and is really hot right now. Various types of things that can give you an advantage, reduce the number of sides in your die. But if you have a lot of the issues, if you are not white, if you're living in a different country, if you're coming from a poorer socioeconomic status, if you're in a niche that isn't quite as hot or as profitable, if you have health problems, if you have a natural temperament that isn't quite so driven, and so that persistence mindset and just keep on getting up and keep on fighting isn't you. Maybe you kind of curl up into a little ball when you experience failure. Maybe you have a much harder time with that kind of stuff. This all adds a number of sides to your die. We can also think of the greens. When you roll a green, it's like a small success that you're building up till you finally have a big pile of successes and you've kind of made it. But let's start rolling these dice and see what actually happens. And forgive me, I'm going to have to use some notes because it's a lot of information. Now, obviously, each one of these dice is going to convert to fully green at some point. How long does this actually take? How many rolls? Well, the D20 is going to take about 71 rolls for it to convert to fully green. The D100, it takes about 518 rolls for that to convert to fully green. So a lot longer. And what about the D200 that Alex used as his example? It's going to take about 1,175 rolls before it converts to fully green, which is not 10 times as much as the D20. It's a lot more because of probability. But let's take a look at business. And let's decide that every single roll is an attempt to do something. And so it's either going to succeed or fail. And let's say we're going to look at what would happen after 1 year, how many cumulative successes you would have, and at 5 years. And first, let's be really unrealistic and roll every single day, which is really kind of not realistic in business. It might be if you're asking people out or something like that, but but you're iterating, you're trying something every single day. Well, with a D20, after 1 year, let me check my notes, you're going to have 313 successes. Not so bad. And after 5 years, 1,773, something like that, successes. So you really have put up this big pile of little successes to make a pretty big success. What about the D100? Because these dice actually exist. Well, after 1 year, it's not going to be 313 successes. It's going to be 21. And after 5 years, 1,406. So you start to catch up, but it takes you a while because you have less advantages. And you're also rolling daily. What about our D200 that Alex introduced into this equation? After 1 year, you're going to have a grand total of 3 successes. And after 5 years, 849. So you're starting to catch up, but it's going much, much slower for you because you're at a disadvantage. But let's talk about realistic timeframes. Let's say that you have a YouTube channel and you're uploading one video a week. So these are your attempts. And with our 20-sided die, after the first year, you're going to have 7.6 successes. You're going to get some hits, but it's taken a while. After 5 years, 208, I believe. I need new glasses. So you're starting to build momentum, but it took you a while. How about our D100? Hold these up. Well, after the first year, 0.9 successes. You might have had a full success after a year. And after 5 years, 7.6 compared to the 208 that a person with a D20 has. But what about the D200 that Alex gave us? Well, after 1 year, 0.7 successes. So you might have one success after 1 year. After 5 years, 2.1. Okay, and this is doing something, iterating weekly, not 208, but 2.1. And let's look at monthly attempts, because I like this one because Alex talks in this video about this idea that it takes about 5 years for you to really start to figure out what the hell you're doing in business. And by 5 years, with monthly attempts, you haven't quite filled up the D20 with green size, but it's pretty close, so it kind of mirrors that. So you're having one of these attempts every month. After 1 year with a D20, one success. Okay, it's tough. But what about 5 years? 11.3. So you're starting to get your feet underneath you. What about a D100? Remember, that was the most advantageous one. D100, after 1 year, about 0.6 successes. Not so great. And after 5 years, one. D200, still somewhere around 0.6 after 1 year. And after 5 years, 0.8. You might not have even had a success ever. Moral of the story, before you give an example like that, you better check the fucking math. But the real moral of the story is, yes, persistence is absolutely necessary. I'm not somebody who's going to tell you don't try. But it's important to know, or at least acknowledge, that the size of the die, the advantages or disadvantages you start out with, profoundly affect the number of attempts you can make before your time or your money or your energy runs out. It's disingenuous to say that if you keep on persisting that you're definitely going to succeed. You might not. Those advantages matter. And when you're a cisgender white male living in America and you're making those claims, well, you're making it from a point of privilege. And that's just counting some of the advantages you might start with. I'm not trying to throw Alex underneath the bus. He provides a lot of good information. Not everything he says is wrong, but it's colored by his experience and by his mindset, by his temperament, and by his worldview. Now, he's not stupid. He definitely anticipates the critique I just made, maybe not as detailed as I made it, but this idea that, people can point to this other person and say, well, they behaved unethically, and that's why they succeeded. Or, I started at a different point, and he says, well, so what? What does that have to do with you? That's true, but psychologically it is incomplete, and it's a bit unfair to the listener. Because what you're telling them is it doesn't really matter the advantages or disadvantages that people have. When you're telling people to ignore things that are manifestly unfair or the playing field isn't level, you're not really building resistance. You're kind of eroding sanity. You're kind of telling them to believe something that isn't actually true. You're gaslighting them. And that's not helping people become tougher. It's doing the opposite. When you refuse to acknowledge that the game is rigged, when you tell people that they're wrong or broken for having an emotional reaction to the fact that it's not a level playing field and things aren't fair, you're kind of really gaslighting them, and you're telling them that there's something wrong with them if they see this. And that's something I see over and over again in videos like this. Hormozi has this temperament of a grinder, somebody that's really going to just move forward. They're going to knock anything out of their way. They're not going to get knocked down by failures. They're going to keep on persisting. And that's, a large part of that is temperament. Some of that is learned, but a large part of that is just temperament. Persistence and resilience and tolerance of frustration, they are points on a spectrum. These are traits that people have, and they vary widely. And when you tell somebody with a different temperament, to just keep on persisting and don't care about what all these other factors, that's like telling somebody with asthma just to breathe deeper. It'll be okay. Why can't you breathe deeper? I'm not saying that these skills can't be developed to bolster up people with different temperaments, but what I am saying is that people are different. Some people have more sides on their die, and as we've seen, those sides matter. One of the other things I saw in the video and in the narrative, so to speak, is Hormozi talks about, generational wealth and the fact that eventually people, the trust fund kids are just, they really know what they're doing. They didn't put in the same work that the person that built all this wealth did. And he talks about them almost with a little bit of disdain. And he's echoing that virtue through struggle, like Protestant work ethic that kind of plagues the society. It doesn't just drive innovation. It also produces guilt and burnout and self-erasure on the people that really don't have that same grind. We're being told that like rest and peace are failure and that there's something wrong with us if we're not pursuing every single day and working till we die. And listen, if I was a trust fund kid, I wouldn't work either because the goal is kind of like, freedom. And so if I already got that, why the hell would I put in more work? Not to be morally superior. Who cares? I just have the money. What would you do? And like a lot of his peers, Hormozi has a survivor bias. He's a person that's made it through persistence and perseverance. There's a lot of other people that tried and failed, and it wasn't just because they gave up after so long. They really gave it their all. It's easy to kind of poo-poo survivorship bias, but it's one of the most studied phenomena in business. It is a real thing. And it's really hard, if not impossible, for successful people to see. They don't want to acknowledge it because that would mean that maybe luck had a role in it as well. I say all this as a person that believes that you should persist, that if you want to change your life, you absolutely should do everything you can to change it. But you have to acknowledge that people start at different points. They have bigger dice to roll, and that there may be a lot more disadvantages they have to overcome. You might need a lot more help. You might always be fighting some of those disadvantages. You might never turn all the sides green because there might be cultural biases or whatever that are constantly plaguing you, or the fact that maybe you don't have that killer instinct. I'm probably going to have a few sides that are always red because it just takes me I'm a little more emotionally fragile. And emotional toughness, it's not a badge of honor in a lot of cases. It's what we're born with. So it's just important to be aware of that. Keep on going at it, but be aware when you hear these really good sounding stories and these really good metaphors, crunch the numbers, see what's actually going on. Because in that example, it doesn't all add up because the guy with the 200-sided die would probably die before he ever really got anywhere. I definitely don't mean to throw Alex and a lot of the other people in his camp under the bus, but I believe they need to be a little more careful with how they talk because very often they can end up alienating or harming the people that they're trying to help. I would love to hear your thoughts on this particular video. If you want to support the channel, you can always like the video if you actually liked it and subscribe, and you can always throw me a buck or two via the super thanks. But I'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts on this whole thing. Do you think I'm just whining and crying, or do you think there's something to this? Thanks a lot for watching, kids. Have a good one.